Alrighty, welcome back. Here I am. Welcome back to another thrilling installment of Wordy Wednesdays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to be reading through the last portion of William Sloane's To Walk the Night. You may be asking yourself, why is he here? He said he might not be. Well, it turns out I am going to be because I did not receive a phone call. I won't be here next week, but that's for different reasons. That will only be for next Wednesday. So, in anticipation of that, I am going to do everything in my power to bang out the last, I think it's 60 pages, give or take. Just about 60 pages. Of To Walk the Night in one go. We will see how that goes. Hopefully we can. When I get to the halfway point, I will look and see what time it is and what I've got coming up, and we will figure it out. I've got a fair amount of time set aside, though. So this one's going to probably be a lengthy one, upwards of 3 hours, give or take. Let's see. So, previously on, we got some interesting little reveals about the mystery that surrounds Selena. Selena Lister, née Normand. And they're very interesting. First of all, she doesn't appear to have a past at all that anyone can find out. No matter what questions were asked her by the police, she wouldn't answer, and they weren't going to pressure her because there's a certain political aspect to the university town where LeNormand died / was murdered / died. So they don't exactly want it to be heavily publicized. Also, grieving widow thing, they don't want to push her too hard. Suffice it to say, nobody actually knows where she comes from, what her family was, who she is. An interesting little possibility popped up during the course of Parsons' investigation, though, which is that a mentally challenged girl named Luella Jamison disappeared about, I think it's 2 days. Here we go. Luella Jamison disappeared the evening of August 7th. On August 9th, at 10:30 in the morning, Joe Peters, over at the county building in New Zion, issued a marriage license to one Walter R. LeNormand of England and a certain Selena Smith. Selena Smith of Lafayette, Oklahoma, aged 21, and there isn't any Lafayette, Oklahoma. So, with that lovely bit of information in mind, Bark comes back to the city, and where Jerry and Selena are getting married. They get married. There's this interesting sort of a hazy sequence with lots of ellipses. Ellipses. And Bark basically tries to drown his sorrows the usual way, which is drinking way too much, and is generally making a mess of himself. And after the wedding manages to, or immediately prior or immediately and around the wedding, he tries to pull himself out of it and largely succeeds. So after they're married, Jerry and Selena go off to a trip in Bermuda. Bermuda. They go to Bermuda for their honeymoon. They come back, and Jerry largely is dissatisfied with his job because it's boring, and so he's like, well, I kind of want to be a college professor, but to do that, I will have to get my PhD thesis. And he's like, well, I know what I want to do, and Selena is supportive of it, so I'm going to go move out to a place that Jerry's father had. And it's in a place called Los Palos, but I can't remember where that's supposed to be. It's Arizona or New Mexico, take your pick. I'm doing a quick skim to see. Yes, the Gertrude Stein bashing, yes. It even says Arizona or New Mexico. It doesn't actually say where. That's so good. No wonder I'm confused. And I can't remember if it's Arizona or New Mexico, because it's literally could be either. Anyway. I'm just double checking here. Anyway, it's a place called Los Palos. It's in the desert. And he's making good progress. He's sending letters out to Bark, every week or so, and then that slows down. And then all of a sudden, Bark receives a telegram that says, "Can you come at once? Meeting limited Tuesday morning, Los Palos. Hope to see you." And he's the letter he'd sent previous to that sounded sort of, oh, you should come out here, please. And Bark sees this and is like, oh, something's up. I don't know what's going on, but my alarm bells are ringing. And so he gets on a train in a Pullman car. If you know anything about Pullman, it says a few things. We could go on to a delightful diatribe about the nature of the railway barons. But we're not going to do that. This is the right time period. Actually, this one might not be. This is 37. But still, there were Pullman cars. Anyway, I think that covers pretty much everything. So, Bark is on the move. And with that, we will pick up with Chapter 12. Chapter 12. Conversation Piece. Los Palos lies along one side of the railroad tracks. In the sharp light of early morning, it had an almost surrealist... Oh, gosh. Off to a good start. Los Palos lies along one side of the railroad tracks. In the sharp light of early morning, it had an almost surrealist clarity of outline. I stumbled down the Pullman steps, half awake, and looked it over without pleasure. Only one building in the ragged row that faced me beyond the highway was of brick. The rest were wood, cracked and bleached with sun and want of paint. A shambling rogues gallery of stores, saloons, garages, and restaurants. There seemed to be no reason for the town's existence. Beyond the highway and the tracks, the bare, gigantic sweep of Brown Valley fell away for mile upon mile without a single spot of green or the solitary cube of a house. There was not even the interruption of a fence. It was far from cold, but I shivered as I looked into that immense emptiness of desert and turned back to Los Palos. On my right, the scrubby facade of Main Street terminated in a blazing red and white service station, and to the left, at the other end of town, was another, equally garish in yellow and scarlet, to mark where the town ended and the desert began. The station itself was a drab frame building without even the dubious distinction of the jigsaw scrollwork that belonged with its period. Beyond it, towering over the whole town, stood the water tower.
Los Palos, in short, was simply one of those desert towns, born when the railroad was building, maintained in a precarious, stunted life while desert-pastured cattle were still worth shipping to market, and dying slowly ever since the profits had gone out of ranching. As I looked it over, it seemed already half swallowed in the immeasurable miles around it, like an old, battered tramp steamer foundering slowly out of sight of land on a calm sea. It depressed me. If this was Jerry's contact with the rest of the world, certainly Cloud Mesa must be a solitary place. I stretched my eyes across the valley to the westward, and though there was a rampart of naked mountains far, very far away, I could see nothing that corresponded with his description. Descriptions, plural. There was no one on the platform but a thin old man in a shiny blue serge suit, whom I took to be the station agent. He looked at me for a few minutes, idly, and went inside the building. Main Street was deserted, and none of the stores seemed to be open. Certainly nothing in Los Palos was worth waking up for as early as 6:15 in the morning. I put my 2 suitcases down where Jerry was sure to see them if he drove up before I came back, and strolled across the highway, Main Street, to look for breakfast. After some wandering up and down, I discovered the sanitary lunch, where one unshaven counterman collected a breakfast of sorts with maddening deliberation. My impatience proved pointless. The coffee tasted like the lees of the water tower, the baked apple had been there a long time, and the bacon would have disgraced a camping trip the first morning out.
"Ain't come in yet."
And then, after a silence of several minutes,
"That'll be 4 bits."
I paid him and got out. Main Street had waked up while I had been eating. I noticed a man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the Tres Hermanos saloon. Tres Hermanos. The Tres Hermanos saloon, and a small dog several doors away was smelling at the base of the telephone pole. And just before I crossed the street, a dusty Hudson sedan, moving at better than 60 miles an hour, roared through Los Palos in about 15 seconds. I looked after it enviously and went back to the station. There was nothing there, of course, but I sat down on the baggage truck and lit a pipe. The country was something to look at. If you are used to the little landscapes of Long Island, of New Jersey, even of upstate New York, it takes quite a while to realize the real size of western scenery. The southernmost peak of the range across the valley was probably as far from where I sat as New York is from Philadelphia. And there was scarcely a thing to catch the eye between me and it. I sat there and let my gaze range over the wide floor of the valley and pretended that time was passing. After a while I consulted my watch, and it was 5 minutes after 6. I had been in Los Palos less than half an hour. It occurred to me that anyone who could stand 50 years of the place would have lived 5 ordinary lives anywhere else. All this is trivial, in a way, but it gave me a queer, lost feeling to be sitting there on the station platform gazing out over several hundred square miles of desert with the death in life of Los Palos at my back. I was nervous. My pipe tasted bitter and strong in my mouth, and my heart felt as though it were beating faster than was necessary. There was no use speculating on why Jerry had sent for me, but the fact that he had done so bothered me. I had expected, when we said goodbye to each other in New York, that we would meet again rarely and casually. There had been an atmosphere of finality about that parting. Jerry, I had felt, now was a part of my past, but hardly of my present. And suddenly he had sent for me, begged me to come at any cost. All the way out on the Limited, I had wondered whether he needed me because of Selena and some quarrel he had had with her, or perhaps the loneliness out here. But Jerry was not that sort of person. He knew how I felt about his wife, and he was proud, much too proud, to admit that he was lonely with her, or that I, who of all people who had been most opposed to his marrying her, could do anything to help him. Jerry never needed help. And yet, what else could he want? He knew that it was inconvenient for me to come. I gave the whole thing up, but there was something disquieting about it just the same. My own thoughts annoyed me. They were born of nothing more than irritation, perhaps, at being kept waiting in a dismal little town with nothing to do and a bad breakfast in my stomach. Los Palos was not my kind of place. I was incongruous in it. Even my clothes were ridiculously good and wholly inappropriate for such a town. I started to call myself a fish out of water until I looked again at the leagues of desert. They made the phrase a ludicrous understatement. Litotes, the Greek word for it was. There was no water out there, no water and even no moisture, except, perhaps, in the center of some cactus plant or the veins of a rattlesnake. There was nothing at all out there, except one remote, minute, crawling pennant of dust with a dark speck at the head of it. For 3/4 of an hour I watched that plume of dust come nearer. It grew with agonizing slowness, but long before I could make out the details of the car, I felt sure it must be Jerry. Now and again the sun caught the windshield and flashed brightly back at me. Sometimes car and dust cloud were hidden behind a brown swale in the valley floor, but as I was finishing my second pipe, it swung up over a last rise down beyond the water tower, crossed the tracks, and roared up to the station. My first thought was that Jerry looked marvelously well. He was wearing a white shirt, open at the neck with the sleeves rolled up. His face, his neck, his forearms were burnt dark with sun, and his hair was bleached to a pale gold color. He jumped up on the platform and ran toward me. Again I had a moment of uneasy surprise. Never that I could remember did Jerry run except when he was playing some game. He sauntered toward you, usually. But now there was an eagerness in him. I knew at once that he was more than ordinarily glad to see me, and that, too, surprised me. But he gave me no time to think or to be surprised.
Hi, Buck.
Hello, Jerry.
Sorry to be so damn late. Got a flat halfway here and lost a lot of time.
That's okay, I told him. I've been giving Los Palos the once-over. He grinned swiftly.
Swell place, isn't it? You ought to see it on Saturday nights. Some of the stores stay open till 8:30 or 9 at night.
He looked at my bags.
These your things?
Well, I said, the rest of the crowd has gone and left these, so I better take them.
Hell, he said, it's swell to see you.
We got into the car.
By the way, want to pick up anything before we pull out? Last chance.
Listen, I told him, if you know a quick way out of this place, for God's sake, take it.
Hold on,
he said, and put the accelerator down on the floorboards. We went out of Los Palos like a bat out of a belfry, and I didn't look back. When we cut across the tracks and hit the desert road, we were doing all of 50, and in spite of the one-track, sandy cart trail we seemed to be on, we kept going like that. The big Packard swallowed the countless turns and dips and pitches of that road with a sort of dizzy recklessness, and after half an hour or so I began to feel uneasy at our unrelenting pace. After all, if anything happened, we were already a thirsty day's walk from the nearest town, and the mountain range ahead of us appeared to be no nearer. I looked... Oh, there's a comma there. Oh, I see. I missed the first comma. After all, if anything happened, we were already a thirsty day's walk from the nearest town, and the mountain range ahead of us appeared to be no nearer. I looked tentatively at Jerry. He was sitting easily behind the wheel, wrenching the car around the curves and meeting the savage roughness of the road with a sort of negligent carefulness that partly restored my confidence. "Don't spare the horses, you hard-riding Westerners," I suggested. He looked at me fleetingly.
"It gets hot out here after 8 o'clock in the morning," he observed, and went on driving.
As it was beginning to get hot, and it was beginning to get hot, I took off my coat, vest, and tie and stowed them in the rear seat, nearly getting pitched out in the process. Then I lit another pipe and tried to relax while we burrowed down one slope and up the opposite side without slowing for an instant. From the station platform, the country over which we were driving had looked fairly level, but I now saw that there was no flat stretch in it. And no end, either, though after a while we began to go up more often than down, and I deduced that we were headed up the far side of the valley. The range ahead of us began to look less naked. I could make out trees in some of the canyons, and we commenced to run quarteringly across a series of draws in which there were a few small, dry bushes. I looked back. Los Palos was small and clear in the desert air, shrunk to the size of a Chinese ivory carving. Now and then its image wavered as I looked at it. The heat was beginning to rise from the baked and bare rock of the earth between. The ridges, the sharp, unweathered angles of the rocks, the wild, jumbled rise and fall of the land gave me a sense of isolation. Man was a stranger to this sort of country. It belonged on some airless planet circling sunward of the earth. I looked again at Jerry, glad that I was not alone, and saw in his face something that I had overlooked at the station. For all the brown of his skin, it was tighter over the bones of his face. There were wrinkles at the corners of his eyes that I had not seen before, and his lips were thinner and set together with a nervous firmness. He had to watch that devil's road with all the concentration in him, of course, at the speed we were traveling, but even that failed. Oh, I see, okay. He had to watch that devil's road with all the concentration in him, of course, at the speed we were traveling, but even that failed to account wholly for the tension in his face. And I had the feeling that though he was glad I was with him, he wasn't thinking about me much. Something else was occupying the part of his mind behind his driving reflexes, and I did not have the faintest idea what it was. Sometime after 8 o'clock in the morning, our road turned gradually left and southward, and after a while we were running parallel to the mountains west of us. The motion up and down the barrancas began to be almost as regular as a long groundswell. After several miles we came to a deeper draw with a steep face to one side, and along its base a patch of shade. Jerry pulled the car into it and turned to me. In the sudden silence I could hear the bubble of the water boiling in the radiator. "We'll stop here a little and cool off," he said, and got out of the car. We walked around some, and I told him it was lonely country. "Yes," he said, "it takes time to get used to it. Then you love it." "I suppose so." Suddenly he looked at me and grinned. "Hell, I forgot. We have breakfast." He rummaged in the back of the car and brought out a thermos of coffee and several bacon sandwiches. I thought of another picnic meal, how long ago, that we had eaten together on the running board of a car. I hoped this time, and then shut my thoughts off. The coffee was hot and exceptionally good. "Selena seems to make better coffee than most brides," I said to him. He pushed at a pebble with his foot. "I made this," he said. "Selena doesn't cook." "None of the old biscuit jokes need apply?" "No, she doesn't really care much for food, one way or the other." His voice implied that he hadn't said everything that was on his mind. I wondered if this was his way of getting at something he wanted to tell me. "Well," I observed, "at any rate, you certainly have it all over the sanitary lunch so far as coffee is concerned." "Oh, God, don't tell me you had breakfast there." "4 bits worth." "I'm sorry, we should have stopped before. I just kept on driving without thinking, I guess." I finished my second bacon sandwich. "It's okay. This makes up for it." "Too bad we haven't any scotch." So I knew he was thinking back too, but I made up my mind not to let him know. "Oh, hell, I've signed the pledge, or practically so. Abstemious is the word for me these days." He was silent a long time. "I'm glad you're doing so well at the job." "I wouldn't say that, but it's an improvement over my performance a while back. Hell, Jerry, I owe you an apology for a lot of things. I acted like a fool." He didn't look at me. "You had reasons. In a lot of ways, they were good ones." "I didn't even have an excuse, really." He got on his feet and began walking up and down in front of me, looking at the ground.
Listen, Bach, before we get there, I want to talk to you a little while, so you'll know what you're getting into and why I wired you.
All right.
First of all, don't get the idea there's anything wrong between me and Selena. I'm more in love with her now than I was when we got married.
Sure, I said. You're a couple of swell people.
Thanks. And I'm going to sound like an ass when I tell you what's on my mind. In one way, I'm happier than I've ever been before, and in another, well, everything's just enough wrong so that I'm worried.
He wet his lips and went on.
You aren't married, so I don't know quite how I can explain it to you. It's just that everything goes so far between us, and then it stops.
I started to say something and stopped, embarrassed.
Nah, it's not that. The sex is part of it. The sex part of it is all right. It's something I can't put into words exactly. But when you're in love, you want to give everything to the person you love. Sex is only one aspect of it. Does this make any sense to you?
Of course it does.
And you don't only want to give everything to the person you love, but you want to be given everything in return. It's a two-way proposition for each person.
I quoted, "My true love hath my heart, and I have his. By just exchange, one for another given."
Yes, he said, it's got to be a just exchange. That's the point.
And it's not that way? I asked him.
He stopped walking and faced me. I feel all the time as though she was holding something back. Sometimes it's almost as though she felt I wasn't old enough to know something, and I can't find out what it is. What it is she knows that I don't. There's something in between us, that's all, and yet she loves me, Bach.
There wasn't anything in this that I could give him a confirming answer to without having to open my memory to that fantastic story Parsons had told me, that story of Luella Jamison. There was, thank God, a more plausible explanation. "After all," I said, "you make her sound as if she had a sort of mother complex, and that's natural enough, in a way. Don't forget this is your first marriage, but it's her second." He began to pace back and forth again, kicking at stones.
"No, that's not it."
"Of course it is."
He shook his head. "Don't forget, she wasn't married long. And to LeNormand. That first marriage doesn't count."
A premonition of something unpleasant went through me. I don't know what I expected him to say next, but what he did say shocked me for a moment.
"You see," he said in a low voice and without looking at me, "when we got married, she was a virgin."
After I rallied from that sudden statement, it did not appear so surprising after all, and I felt glad for him in an inexplicable way. And then I saw what he was getting at. It made it all the harder to explain something that he felt was missing between them. At this moment, a sense of loneliness so acute that it was almost like fear came over me. I remembered the bleached sterility of Los Palos with nostalgia. Here in the middle of an enormous and lifeless desert, I was talking to the man who had been, who still was, my best friend, and yet if I could in any way have escaped from him, I would have done so at once. No reason for my sudden gust of feeling presented itself, but I knew that I ought not to be there, that already the whole horrible web of circumstance that had caught us both and changed us, and from which I thought I had escaped, was closing in on me again. I looked at Jerry, and the tightness of his face began to make me feel afraid. He had changed, and there was a long gap of unshared time between us. A time when we had been growing and altering in different directions. I was afraid not of him, but of what he wanted with me.
"So you see," he was saying, "it isn't the ordinary thing at all. We're not unhappily married. Don't get that idea."
"Hell," I said, "I haven't got any idea at all."
He looked straight at me. "I've got to try to tell you what's bothering me, and then I want you to tell me something. Something that I'm sure you know. You've got to know it."
"All right," I said. "Anything I can tell you, I will."
"Selena and I got married pretty quickly after LeNormand's death," he said, and there was a perfectly objective tone in his voice.
I could not tell whether he regretted the fact or not.
The rest of you didn't approve of that. One of the things you and Dad both said at various times was that we ought to know each other better. You remember that?
Yes, I told him.
Why did you tell me that?
It was a question I did not want to answer, so I parried it as smoothly as I could. I guess both of us felt it was a little too rapid for being entirely sure of your happiness. He looked disappointed.
I imagined that was Dad's idea, but I thought maybe you had something more definite in your mind.
No, I said at once.
Well, he went on after a pause, it wouldn't have made any difference.
He stopped as if he wanted me to agree with him or disagree. I couldn't be sure which. I don't see what you're driving at.
Damn it, he said harshly. I don't know any more about Selena than I did the day I married her.
His voice seemed to ring in the trench of the barranca where we were. The sound of his words seemed to expand, to go into the ground and penetrate the rock wall under which we were standing. It echoed in the air, in the heat, in the sun that encompassed us. 1.5 years had passed since Jerry had married Selena. In all that time she had not told him who she was or where she came from then. The only possible explanation was the story Parsons had told me, the terrible theory that Selena was Luella Jamison. He was watching me closely. After a while, he went on.
I don't know if I can explain it to you. You know how, in stories, some little habit of the wife's or the husband's grows and grows out of all proportion in the mind of the other until finally there's an explosion? Well, that's the way it is with me, and I'm afraid of the explosion. Bach, do you know that everything Selena ever says to me is based on nothing but the present or the future?
He stopped a moment and looked down the ravine and out across the desert.
You don't notice how many things people say that go back to their childhood or to their past. People they refer to, things they remember, familiarities with this and that. Everybody is like that and doesn't know it. Everybody but Selena.
Listen, I said to him. She had a shock, don't forget. Naturally, she doesn't want to think back to that.
He sighed. No, Bach, she's talked to me often enough about LeNormand in a funny sort of way, and quite a good bit more about Collegeville, faculty wives, and all sorts of things, but never anything at all before that.
I was afraid to ask what was in my mind, but I knew that it was then or never. Doesn't she ever talk about her family, even? He stared at me with dry eyes and a set mouth.
No. Never. That is...
And he stopped suddenly. You see, I said, you're holding something back. It isn't so bad as you make out.
Once, he said, and his voice was tighter than before. Once she said something about her family. At least, I suppose it was her family.
Then he was silent for quite a while.
It was when we were on our honeymoon in Bermuda. We had a little house to ourselves, you know. One night I woke up. Our bed was by the window, and the full moon was coming through it in a perfect flood of light. She was lying there in it, in the moonshine, asleep.
He licked his lips and went on.
I saw her lying there, lovely, perfect, asleep, with the moon full on her face. You know how beautiful she is?
I nodded.
Well, I can't tell you exactly what just looking at her did to me. It somehow made me a bigger person after a while. I stopped being myself or knowing anything except how much I loved her. And I leaned over finally and kissed her, and she woke up. She looked at me a minute, and I could see she wondered why I had waked her. And then she smiled a little as if she knew how much I was loving her, and moved over closer to me. We lay there and looked out the window at the moonlight on the lawn and the trees and the distant ocean, and we didn't speak. Finally, she sighed a little, or I thought she did, and she said something in a low voice. It was meant to be to herself, I reckon, but I overheard it.
He stopped again. I didn't speak.
She said...
Jerry's voice was low and wondering.
She said, "This is the thing my people do not know." Jesus, I said before I could stop myself. I had expected anything but that puzzling remark. It did not fit in with the things Parsons and I had discussed. It made no sense for Luella Jamison to have made that remark. Jerry took careful aim and kicked a bit of rock out into the hard sunshine on the other side of the ravine. That's the only reference she's ever made. Oh, I've asked her, but she never tells me. Sometimes she just laughs and says I've got to forget she had any past at all. Several times I've tried to press her into telling me.
What happened then?
It sounds silly to say it, but she got so angry I was afraid to go on.
Do you think she has a guilty conscience or anything?
God, he said impatiently. I don't know. I'd swear she had nothing in her whole mind that she was ashamed of. But it's the not knowing that torments me. It's the noticing that she never goes back of that time in Collegeville. It's the feeling that there's something she won't share with me, some part of her that she won't give. And it's begun to scare me. Suppose it is something pretty horrible. That wouldn't make any difference to me, and she knows it. Suppose this damned thing, this reason she has for not telling me who she is, comes out sometime and I'm not ready for it. It got so that I was afraid to have her meet strangers for fear they were a part of that past of hers, whatever it was. That's one of the reasons we came out here.
I could think of nothing to say to him.
This is the thing my people do not know, he quoted slowly and half to himself. Then he turned to me and said, Bach, I have a hunch that you know something about Selena that I don't. You've got to tell me what it is.
Don't be silly, I said quickly.
How could I? You've been with me practically every time I've seen her, and all through the LeNormand business. No, he said, you're not being honest with me. I know you pretty well, Bach, and I've been thinking back over everything. After that time you came back from Collegeville, you were different in lots of ways. You drank more. You avoided being with us. There was something on your mind, something that you knew, and it's either something you found out by yourself when you went back there, or it's something Parsons told you. And it's something that I've got to know. Maybe you think I'm hysterical or foolish or completely nuts, but I tell you, I've got to know what it is. He looked at me steadily and with an eagerness that made me feel almost sick. Yet there was my promise to Parsons. I could break that and tell him the story of Luella Jamison, but there was no way in which I could see that doing so would help him. Instead, it would simply add another uncertain horror to revolve in his mind. After living with the story of that incredible disappearance and the possibilities it contained, I knew what it could do to a mind that fastened upon it. No, certainly I would never tell him anything about that. Parsons, I answered carefully, was stuck. He told me we were being followed. He knew all about what we had been doing. Knowing that got me sort of nervous. That was why I was funny about things then. He disregarded my words. So you won't tell me? Listen, I said. The only thing that I know you don't... the only thing I know that you don't has nothing to do with you or Selena except indirectly. It's nothing that will help you in the least, and I gave my word to Parsons that I wouldn't tell anyone about it. He told me because he wanted me to tell him whether it had any connection with the LeNormand case, and it didn't, and I told him so. That's all there is to that. He shook his head. All right, you're a stubborn guy when you make up your mind, but I want you to promise me one thing.
What is it?
After you've been out here a while, I want you to think whether you'll tell me what that thing was, and whether you notice anything else that could help me.
I nodded. All right, I said, but I'd have told you long ago if I'd thought it was a good idea. We climbed into our car again without saying anything more. As he put the car in gear, Jerry said, And Parsons never found out who killed LeNormand. No, I said. And then I wondered if somehow he had the idea that Selena had anything to do with it. Anyway, he told me he was positive that Selena and you and I... Anyway, he told me that he was positive that Selena and you and I didn't do it. He said he could prove that much. Jerry said nothing for a moment as he swung the car back into the miserable road.
Parsons is a smart man. I thought he would solve it.
Well, I said, he didn't have anything to go on. No clues and no motive and no witnesses. Jerry drove intently and without looking away from the road.
There were those equations. Remember the sheets of old notepaper on the table?
Yes, but I couldn't see what they proved. After all, figures don't lie, let alone murder. Jerry smiled fleetingly.
I've been playing around with those equations. Selena came in the other day and found me at it. Like a fool, I told her what I was doing. She didn't like it.
Oh? I said. Why not?
I don't know exactly. I suppose it's a piece with the rest, not wanting to have anything to do with the past.
Well, I observed, I remember she was interested in those Arabian books of Dad's.
Yes, he said, frowning a little. She knows a lot of math. I can't figure out where she picked it up. From LeNormand, maybe.
After that, it grew too hot to talk. The car rolled steadily along, about west by south, on the long road to Cloud Mesa. Just before 11 o'clock, we reached it. Chapter 13. Cloud Mesa. Around and above us the night was growing cold. The stars were points of smaller light, the shadow masses of the trees had denser, less distinguishable shape against the sky, and the water of the Sound glinted seldom and faintly. The darkest hour. That hackneyed tag of speech went through my mind as I turned to Dr. Lister. "It will be dawn soon," I said, "but this is the part of the story that matters most."
"Of course," he said. "Are you too tired to go on?"
"I'm too tired to stop."
"You mustn't be afraid to call a halt if you wish."
He did not seem weary at all. Erect as ever, quiet, with his eyes fixed upon me steadily, it gave me strength to look at him. "We could never go back to this," I said. "It is better to finish now."
"Yes."
His voice was calm, but I noticed that one of his fingers was tapping against the edge of the table. The last few miles of our ride, the road went uphill steadily. We must have climbed nearly 1,000 feet. Then we swung around the shoulder of the mountains and saw Cloud Mesa. It was something of a geological puzzle to me. In shape, it resembled the ordinary mesa of the southwest, with the usual steeply sloping sides covered with rocky detritus, ending toward the top in sharp cliffs of naked rock. The level expanse of its summit was as sharply marked as the edge of a table, and on the valley side it rose sheer from the floor of the desert. But the western edge seemed only partly separate from the wall of mountains behind, and the northern, narrower end slid down to the floor of a mountain ravine into which our car began to dip. Sharp and clear I could see the cube of the house about halfway up the mesa's northern slope and shining white in the sun. The place had been built by an artist named Eberhardt, whom Dad had once befriended. He had come out to the west to paint and to recover from the effects of a dose of gas in Belleau Wood. Before he died, he did some strange, harsh-colored pictures of the desert country which I never liked, because there was a brutality in them that you couldn't ignore. He left most of them, and the house as well, to Dr. Lister, out of gratitude, I suppose. It had remained empty until Jerry and Selena came there, and my heart sank a little as I looked across the ravine. If there was ever a lonelier place, or one more dwarfed by its setting, I never saw it. Jerry pulled the car up in front of the weather-beaten sort of shack that was apparently used for a garage, and we got out stiffly. He hauled forth my bags, and we went toward the house. Seen close at hand, it was not quite so forbidding. The walls were a whitewashed cream in color, and there were the conventional blue shutters. It was larger than it had looked from where I had first seen it. Apparently there was a spring just behind the house. At any rate, there was a patch of green which must have meant water in this thirsty country. Selena was standing in the doorway to greet us. She was wearing a yellow linen dress and sandals. Her beauty was unchanged, so far as I could see. The sun did not appear to have tanned her bare legs and arms, and her face and hair were as I had remembered them, sculptural and perfect. Later, when she moved, I saw that she was walking once again with the same long, swift stride that she had when we first knew her and before she had began to imitate grace. "Hello, Buck," she said, and held out her hand. I took it and told her I was glad to see her, which was a lie. I think she knew it. "Well, Buck," said Jerry, "welcome to our humble home." His voice didn't sound quite natural to me. I told them both I was glad to be there, and we went into the house. Inside it was dark and cool. The floor was tiled, and the heavy adobe walls seemed to hold the freshness of the night all through the heat of the day. The room we entered was clearly the living room, with a big fireplace to the left at the eastern end. It did not have much furniture aside from several Navajo rugs on the floor. A long settle in front of the fireplace, a large table of unpainted wood, and 3 straight chairs. Jerry opened the door on the far side of the room. "This is your place," he said, and carried my bags in. The room was scarcely more than a cubicle, with a bed, a washstand, and a single window opening to the east. "I think you'll find everything you want." "Sure," I said. "This is palatial." But actually I found myself thinking of it with an obscure sense of relief as a sort of refuge. Oh, I got the wrong emphasis. But actually I found myself thinking of it with an obscure sense of relief as a sort of refuge. A little better. After I'd washed and got into some old clothes, Jerry showed me the rest of the house. Next to my room was a sort of small study, well lined with books, which he told me was where he worked. Behind the study was a large bedroom where Jerry and Selena slept, with a door opening out of its west wall. The kitchen was in a lean-to shed at the southwest corner of the house. I wondered what there was about the place that bothered me. It was pleasant enough inside, and done with a simplicity and directness that were agreeable. Even the half-dozen or so of Eberhardt's pictures on the walls could not explain why I felt uneasy. But as soon as I stepped out of doors again, I saw the reason. The great bulk of the mesa loomed towering and imminent above the house. Incalculable tons of earth and rock seemed almost suspended above its roof. The very scale of that slope made you feel like an ant. Oh, the very scale of that slope above you made you feel like an ant. I don't know how to better give the effect than to say that I felt always as if a giant were about to step on the house and all of us in it. Jerry showed me over the place with much Jerry showed me over the place with much pride, and I began to feel that I had been a fool about my first reaction to it. But behind his enthusiasm and the steady flow of talk which he kept up, I felt his relief at my coming. How long had the silences been when just the two of them were there alone? And later, in the afternoon, when the blue shadow of the mesa poured down and over the house and left us in a sort of twilight, my uneasiness returned to me. We watched that shadow swoop down the slope above us, and after it had swept over the house, I turned to go indoors. "Wait a minute, Brock," said Jerry. "I want to show you something else." He led me a few yards up the slope and pointed to what looked like the remains of an uneven rock stairway that began behind the spring and clambered up the wall of the mesa above us. "Cliff dwellers. God knows how long ago, but you can still climb their stairs. Want to go up?" I saw that he did, so I agreed.
It was not really hard or dangerous. It was not a really hard or dangerous ascent. The stairs were steep, but in pretty good shape. Although we stopped to breathe and look back and down several times, it was only a quarter of an hour or less until we were at the top. Below us spread the gigantic sweep of the desert, tarnished gold where the sun still lay, and purple-blue where the shadows from the western mountains were racing across it as the sun sank behind us. Watching that great tidal wave of darkness pouring across the valley, I suddenly realized how truly the earth was a ball, hung in gulfs of space and spinning around its axis with a majestic precision and power. I almost thought I could feel the eastward surge of the mesa under my feet. After a moment, we turned and walked across the level top. It was very bare, with a few bushes, and here and there a low mound that Jerry said he suspected was the remains of ancient houses. Ahead of us was a slight rise in the ground. As we drew near it, I saw that on it stood an oblong of rock. We halted and looked at that single piece of weathered stone, massive, rough-hewed by the chisels of men who were dust 1,000 years ago. Unmistakably, it was an altar. "To the unknown God," I said. Jerry stared down at it a long time. "Yes," he said finally, "to the unknown God, only I suppose they had a name for him. The people who lived up here, that is." Certainly this was one of the high places that men of the very ancient world had felt to be holy, whether in Palestine or in the American desert. Even when houses had stood on the mesa top, this must have been a still place, aloof and plainly not a part of the business of human living at all. So they had hewed a stone and put it where it could lie for century upon century, here on this height, under the sky and swept clean forever by the great winds. An altar, yes, and in a place where they had felt the immensity of the universe. An altar, yes, and in a place where they had felt that the immensity of the universe touched the immediacies of the earth on which they lived. This stone was their Ebenezer. It marked their recognition of the something more than they could put a name to. A memorial to the tremendous force or will that had created the earth and the stars. I turned away from it reluctantly, and yet eager to leave the height and the wind that blew by us. Such vastnesses lay around us that I was suddenly hungry for a roof and a fire and 4 close walls. Jerry seemed more than willing to go at once. We scrambled down the shadowy stairs with cautious haste, and as we went we saw that Selena must have lighted a fire, for flickers of orange radiance spilled out of the windows below us. Jerry and I got the supper ready. Selena sat in the living room and read. I remembered that Jerry had said she did not cook, but I felt a little annoyed at her just the same. When we finally got it assembled, it was a working man's supper. The climb and the air had given me a tremendous appetite. The 2 of us ate heartily, but I noticed that Selena moved the food around on her plate but swallowed hardly more than 1 or 2 bites. It was a quiet meal, perhaps because we, Jerry and I, were wolfing our food. Yet, as I ate, I thought how seldom they spoke to each other. But the food was good, and I didn't mind much the silence. I didn't much mind the silence. That makes more sense. After it was finished, we pushed back our chairs and I lit a pipe. A feeling almost of peace came over me. For the first time I felt at home, not strange in any way. I smiled at Selena and said, "This is very pleasant, Selena. I'm glad I came." She smiled back at me almost automatically. "It is a beautiful place, isn't it?" Jerry seemed determined to keep the conversation going. He began to explain that the life grew on you, and that you never got tired of watching the desert and the mountains, and that we should have to take some tramps as soon as I got used to the climate.
After a while, Selena asked me if I thought I had everything I needed in my room. I said I thought I had. She told me, "You'll be sleepy early tonight, I think. The desert makes you sleepy, and the air at night." Jerry added quickly that, while I could turn in any time I wanted to, he hoped I'd sit up and talk for a while. He began to stack the dishes and carry them out to the... Wow, why am I having trouble with that? He began to stack the dishes and carry them out to the kitchen, firmly declining my efforts to help him. Selena went back to the settle in front of the fire and picked up her book again. Once, as Jerry was cleaning the crumbs from the table, she turned and looked over her shoulder at him. "Are you going to work tonight, Jerry?" "Well," he said, and there was a faint flavor of apology in his tone, "I'm almost through, you know, and I thought I'd do a bit more. I think I'm getting somewhere." "Darling, it's no use, you know. I wish you would give up the whole idea." His face set a trifle stubbornly. You must allow for an old man's crotchets. I get a kick out of it." And then, turning to me, he said swiftly, "I'm doing a bit of mathematical research for my thesis. It's really based on that dope of LeNormand's, but I think I see a way to present it so the boys will swallow it. If I do, it'll be worth publishing." So that was what he was working at. I wondered why Selena did not like it. Plainly, it annoyed her very much, but she contented herself with saying, "You are wasting your time." Jerry laughed. "Don't worry your handsome head over my math, sweet. It's harmless." She made no answer, but I thought in the uncertain light of the fire that an expression had gone over her face of a sort I could not quite define. Still, her face was shaded by the lamp behind her, and I was not sure. We could hear Jerry, back in the kitchens, whistling to himself and splashing the water in the dishpan, but she read on in her book without lifting her head, and I sat smoking my pipe and watching her. Suddenly I saw a curious thing. She was crying. There weren't any tears, and she didn't make a sound, but her face was contorted with grief, and the hand lying beside her on the settle was clenched till the knuckles were white. Any woman, by crying, can make me entirely miserable, but with Selena it was doubly unbearable. I did not associate that sort of weakness with her, for one thing, and for another, because I did not like her, it made it impossible for me to notice that she was crying at all. So I got up and stood by the mantel and smoked my pipe and looked at the fire and pretended that I did not know what she was doing. Some fragment of sound made me look up. She had risen, and without looking at me or making the slightest sign, she went down the room and out the front door. It closed behind her, but in the instant when she opened it, I had seen beyond her the black, star-sprinkled sky of the western night, and the distant shouldering silhouette of the mountains to the west. A gust of cold air went through the room, and the fire flickered. Jerry stuck his head into the room for a moment when he heard the door close, but returned at once to the kitchen without saying anything. The water went on splashing in the dishpan, but he had stopped whistling. Nothing in life, I think, ordinarily happens in great, thunderous episodes of obvious and dramatic force. Life is a series of small things, and most of them mean much or little depending on how the observer thinks of them. I, for instance, didn't pay any real attention to the things that happened in that room that night. And yet, if I had, I would have seen a pattern in them, the pattern of the fifth act of a tragedy, when the play is all played out and only the final words, the ultimate destruction of the protagonist, await fulfillment. I see these things now for what they were worth, the last small events, before an unthinkable horror of a thing was to happen. But at the time I thought merely that Selena had gone outside to get control of herself, that she would be back soon, and that it was embarrassing to be stuck into the middle of a mess like this. And I couldn't quite get over a feeling of surprise at Selena's crying. There didn't seem to have been enough cause for tears, even for a woman with much less fortitude than Selena had. Thinking back, I couldn't believe there was any real reason for her crying at all. She had been annoyed with Jerry, not hurt by him. After a moment, I went over to the settle and sat down. Selena's book was in my way, and as I moved it to one end of the seat, I saw it was an old copy of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales. A book that I felt sure came from the bookcase in Jerry's room in the Long Island house. I picked it up idly. She had left it face down and began to read at her own place. And as evening grew darker, hundreds of variegated lamps were lit. The sailors danced on the deck, and when the young prince came out, more than 100 rockets shot up into the sky. "Hey, Buck!" It was Jerry's voice from the kitchen. "What? Will you have scotch or rye?" "Scotch." He appeared with a tray, a bottle, a pitcher of water, and 2 glasses. "Even if you have practically signed the pledge as you claim, a nightcap or 2 won't hurt us." "Hell no," I agreed. "I'm all for an occasional renewal of youthful folly anyway." "You always were a philosophical so-and-so," he said. "Personally, I just drink without thinking out a formal reason for it." He poured us a couple of stiff ones. They tasted good there in front of the fire, and I took a long pull. "This is the McCoy, Jerry." "Yeah, it's good to see you again." "Here's to it." "Down the hatch." He poured out another apiece, and we took it slower. Jerry stared into the fire for a while and then turned to me, almost impulsively. "You see how it is." "Damn it," I said, "I don't see anything." He looked at me thoughtfully, as if to find out whether I meant it. "She's gone up there, you know." "Up where?" "Up to the top of the mesa." "My God," I said, "in the dark? She'll fall and kill herself." His answer came after quite a while. "She never has." I let that sink in for a minute. "You mean," I asked him incredulously, "she goes up there often?" "Almost every night." "Are you serious?" "Yes, I'm serious as hell." "But, Jerry," I argued, "it doesn't make sense. What does she do it for?" He swirled the whiskey and water in his glass round and stared at it. "I wish I knew. I wish to God I knew." "Listen," I said, "there must be some reason. Maybe she likes to be alone and look at the stars and moon up there." Even while I was speaking, it sounded foolish. "Maybe." He added nothing to that one word for a time, and then took another drink. "I followed her once. It took me a hell of a while, even in the moonlight, to get up there. When I did, I couldn't see her anywhere. The moon was bright, too. But, of course, it's a big place. After a while I called, but she didn't answer." He put his glass down between his feet and fished out a cigarette. "She must have heard me, though, because the next morning she bawled hell out of me for going up. Told me it was too dangerous, and I mustn't do it again." "For Christ's sake!" He was groping in his pockets. "Got a match?" I found a solitary paper packet in my own pocket. There were only a few matches left in it. "Here." He lit his cigarette, blew out a long funnel of smoke, and observed, I've got so I don't mind any more." We had a few more drinks and felt fine and talked over the old days, and it was pleasant. Twice, I remember, Jerry put more wood on the fire before we went off to our respective beds. And when I blew out the lamp in my room, I had neither seen nor heard Selena come back to the house. But I thought to myself she must have come in by the door into their bedroom. The next day was much cooler. A sharp wind was coming down off the mountains, and I was surprised to see a gray scud of cloud across the The next day was much cooler. A sharp wind was coming down off the mountains, and I was surprised to see a gray scud of cloud across the sky. Jerry and I set out, after breakfast, for a walk up toward the peak beyond and behind the mesa. Selena must have come home, for she was at breakfast, looking very still and without any morning small talk. She said she didn't want to talk, and that it was not a nice day, but she hoped we'd have a good time. There was nothing really worth telling about the walk. We climbed pretty far up one shoulder of the peak and sat down to eat our sandwiches in the lee of a rock pinnacle. After we finished, I filled my pipe, and Jerry put a cigarette in his mouth. Then, for a few minutes, we thought we didn't have any matches. Finally, he found the paper I'd given him the night before, and by the mercy of God, I got my pipe going with the last one. He lit his cigarette from the pipe, and I sailed the empty match out into the wind. We watched it fall, idly and without attention. If I had known what was going to happen, I might have paid a good deal more heed to its long, curving drop out of sight. As it was, though, we sat and smoked contentedly for a while and looked down across the desert. "Bach," Jerry said, keeping his eyes on the view, Would you be willing to tell me now what it is you know?" "I can't," I told him honestly. "It wouldn't do you any good, and it wouldn't prove a thing." "Would it prove anything about who killed LeNormand?" "No," I said. "I'm positive it wouldn't." "Okay." He was quiet, as though planning what to say next. "I've got something I want to tell you, and to get your reaction to. Do you mind my talking about it?" "Of course not." He leaned back against the rock. "I've come to the conclusion that if I could find out who killed LeNormand and why, I'd know about this thing that's between Selena and me. I've been thinking over the whole business for a long time now, and I'm reasonably sure I've figured out what the only clue is." Pretty long-range work, wasn't it? But I was worried. I didn't want to reopen that whole murder case. I most emphatically did not want to remember that night in Eldridge Observatory. "No," he said calmly, "it wasn't long-range work at all. I had the clue with me. Those equations that were on LeNormand's table. He was working at them when he died, I'm sure of that." "Even if he was," I told him impatiently, "a few pencil scratches on a piece of paper are seldom fatal." "That depends. They are if they're in order to a firing squad. Listen, Bach, you don't know what a big thing LeNormand was on to. The biggest thing in the world, by God!" He was silent for a second. "Do you remember any of your college math?" "Not much." "Well, I'll try to explain it to you in words then. Only, it's hard to put into words. LeNormand's work followed the stuff of a guy named Minkowski. Ever hear of him?" "He sounds sort of Polish." "Damned if I know what he was, except that he was a great mathematician. LeNormand always spoke of him as if Minkowski was the only man who would have understood his own ideas. But LeNormand was way beyond Minkowski." This didn't interest me much. Minkowski. Why do these mathematicians have such cockeyed names? "Nuts," said Jerry. "There have been jokes about your own name, if it comes to that, and mine sounds like the part of a mouthwash. Let me try and get this across to you. Minkowski worked on the problem of time, among other things. Lots of people talk about time as if it were a fourth dimension. In a way, it is. Everything tangible has length and breadth and thickness, and also it exists in time. It lasts. It has duration. If it didn't, you wouldn't be able to grasp its existence any more than you could figure out something that lacked one of the other three dimensions." "All right," I said. "I agree to all that." "But," he went on, very earnestly, "in another way, time isn't like the other dimensions. You can't see the time dimension of anything. You can even forget about it the way Euclid did, and do lots of things to geometrical figures, at least on paper, without taking it into account at all. This fellow Minkowski discovered that time is not any ordinary spatial quality of anything, but his idea was that it would become so if it was multiplied by the square root of -1. "My old friend," I remarked, "the square root of -1. I haven't thought of it in years. It's in the same class with that other thing, the nth power. And wasn't there a funny-looking symbol that represented infinity?" "There is." He looked at me curiously. "The inside of your mind must be a queer place." "It's cozy," I told him. "Yes. Well, LeNormand figured out a set of equations that proved the serial nature of time." "Huh?" "Sure. There isn't just one time.
There are lots of times. Why, everybody believes in that if you stop to think about it. You've heard people say, time passes slowly, or the time went by like lightning. Well, it's sort of like the old song about who takes care of the caretaker's daughter. If you talk about time passing, you're actually measuring it against something. And that something is a sort of second time. I felt distinctly confused. But I knew that once Jerry started to explain something, all hell would not deflect him, so I sat and waited for the rest of it to roll over me. The nearest way I can give you an idea of LeNormand's work is to say that he applied this theorem of Minkowski's to the conception of a serial time, or a bunch of times running on up into infinity. I know you don't get it, and it's not a thing you can explain even with diagrams, but I guess you can see that everyone, from Einstein to little old Bill Feldman in the math department was on his neck for it. My God, I said, I don't see how they even understood it. They didn't. Well, that's about all I can tell you about LeNormand's theories, because it's all I'm sure I understand. There's one last equation. I'm working on it now. If I can decipher what he was putting down in that... Jerry's voice trailed off a moment. Anyhow, you see why I think LeNormand had hold of something big. He used to tell me some things you could do with his stuff just for fun. I remember he said once that if you could control your mind after you were dead and outside your body, you could make it travel through time. He used to tell me that it would do a lot of Christians good to go back and take a look at the crucifixion before settling down to an eternity of bliss. Nice, I said. A very nice, pleasant thought to take home with you. Hell, said Jerry. I don't suppose he meant that stuff, or most of it anyway. We sat there for several moments without any more words. Perhaps Jerry was thinking. For my part, I knew that I could never understand what he had been talking about, so there was no use in trying any thought. So there was no use my trying any thought. I just sat. After a while he went on, and his voice was lower and graver somehow. LeNormand was killed by some kind of chemical, or else a ray of some sort. More likely a ray, though God knows where it came from. And it must have been because of his work. There was no other reason to kill him. There was Selena. Yes, he said, Selena. Selena, who won't tell me who she was before we met her. Bach, can you, for God's sake, tell me why she should be so silent about her past, unless it would connect her, or someone she is sheltering, with that murder? His voice was suddenly strained and urgent. Listen, I said quickly, there's nothing to that idea, and if it's any comfort to you, it wasn't what Parsons and I talked about either. Thanks for that much. He stopped a moment and wet his lips. You don't know, I suppose, whether he ever investigated to find out who Selena is? Yes, I told him, he did. And did he find out? No. You see what I have to think, don't you, Bach? I know it was a scientist's murder. I am certain Selena knows who did it. That's why she's keeping such a careful watch against giving anything away about her past. And she married LeNormand just to keep an eye on him? He nodded grimly. Yes. Damn it. Do you think I like this? Do you think I enjoy suspecting my wife of being implicated in a murder? A horrible murder at that, and of a man I like damn well? I think you're building a lot on a pretty slender foundation. Yes, he admitted. I know that. But there's another thing. She hates my working on that stuff of LeNormand's. She doesn't like it, and she tries to stop me. Remember last night how she told me it was useless? That's the word she uses when she wants to say a thing is altogether bad. I suppose she has the idea that if I go on with what I'm doing, the same thing will happen to me that happened to LeNormand. It came over me at last in what torment he had been living. There was nothing I could say without putting in his mind the alternative that Selena was Luella Jamison. And yet, I wish now that I had told him Parsons' story. Bach, don't you see how much of it fits? Think how intelligent Selena is. Half the time I believe she knows more about LeNormand's work than I do. Just from the little things she lets drop once in a while. Where else could she get that intelligence from but a scientist's family? That intelligence and her knowledge?
You're born with intelligence. You don't acquire it.
Maybe.
Anyway, your whole idea is crazy. It's as thin as tissue paper and as improbable as a movie scenario. What scientist do you suspect?
I don't suspect any of them. There are 50 men whose careers would have been ruined by LeNormand's work.
Are any of them missing a daughter or a wife?
He looked at me hard. I don't know yet. I'm getting reports on all of them from an agency.
Good God!
You see, Bark, he said quietly, if I can't eliminate this horrible idea that I have in my mind, I'll have to live with it for the rest of my life.
Chapter 14. Sometime is now. We got up after that and started down the mountain. The wind was cold at our backs, and we hurried. Several times I should have liked to smoke another pipe, but the matches were all gone. I muttered about that annoying fact to Jerry, and was surprised to find that he was very much bothered about it. He was certain that the matches we had used there on the mountain were the last ones in the house. I couldn't believe it, but he was really worried. He insisted that since he was the one who did the housekeeping, he would know whether there were any more matches, and most assuredly there were not. Neither of us liked the idea of a fireless evening, a cold supper, and a long drive into town the next day. Suddenly he stopped and turned back to me with a grin.
Say, I know what we can do. We'll get a fire with a spark from the car battery. Why didn't I think of that before?
And we went slogging on down the slope with lighter hearts. Jerry was worried about Selena's being pretty well frozen by the time we got there, and we hurried as fast as my legs and shortness of wind would permit. Our path brought us round the shoulder of a ridge and into sight of the house about a quarter of a mile ahead of us. The moment we saw it, both of us stopped. The window at our end, a living-room window, was glowing with light. From the orange warmth of it in the shadow of the wall, from the way it flickered, even at that distance, we knew the light could come only from the fireplace. Instantly, I was disappointed. Probably some primitive survival in the back of my brain, or possibly nothing but a hangover from Boy Scouting, had made me look forward to our fire-making experiment with a perverse sort of anticipation. Now it would not be necessary. Selena had a fire. The effect on Jerry was different. He looked at the light a while without speaking or moving. For a minute or two his expression was incredulous, and then it changed, tightened, altered in a way that I could not analyze. "Well," I said, "we won't have to try our luck with a couple of dry sticks or a pair of battery cables after all."
"No," he said. "She's lit a fire. She's lit a fire."
He seemed puzzled and perhaps slightly uneasy. "Maybe she thought of the battery stunt before we did, or maybe she found a match," I suggested.
"No," he said. "The car's still in the shed, and there wasn't a match in the house."
His voice trailed off slowly, reluctantly, I thought. "Oh, well," I told him, "any fire is better than none. Take the gifts the gods provide." He looked at me.
"What's that? Oh, yes, sure."
But he wasn't thinking at all about what I had said. He kept the lead as we went on to the house, but he was no longer hurrying. In fact, it seemed to me that he was hardly moving with any purpose at all. If it hadn't been the end of a fairly long tramp, I'd have thought him merely strolling. Several times he lifted his head and looked toward the house. Each time I noticed how tense his face was, and how remote the expression around his eyes. Sure enough, when we entered the living room, there was a big, crackling fire on the hearth, dried desert wood that burned intensely and was gone to ash in an hour. Selena was sitting on the settle, looking into the flames. There were filaments of fire glowing in her pale, bright hair, and a faint flush on her cheeks from the heat. "Hello," she said. "Have an interesting walk?" "Sure," I said. "Only keeping up with a long-legged mountain goat like your husband is no job for one who hath been long in city pent." "He does walk fast, doesn't he?" I went over and stood with my back to the fire. The heat soaked into my legs and took some of the tiredness out of them. Jerry was standing behind the settle, behind Selena. He took out his package of cigarettes and put one between his lips. His voice was perfectly casual. "Give me a match, will you, honey?" That woman could think, and think fast. Only the smallest trace of some expression went over her face. Then she stooped and pulled out from the flames a long twig of mesquite. "Here," she said, and held it to his cigarette. He drew in a long drag of smoke and looked at her across the flame without saying anything except, "Thanks." She tossed the twig back into the flames and sat down again. "We were worried," I remarked. "Jerry was positive there wasn't a match in the house, and we used up our last on the mountain. But I see you found one." Jerry came round the end of the settle and stood at the opposite side of the fireplace, looking down at his wife. "Yes," he said, with an unsuccessful attempt at lightness in his tone. "Where did you find the match?" She looked up at him, and there was a sort of stillness in her face that I shall never forget. "Does it matter?" "No," he said. "It doesn't matter at all where you found it. It matters if you found it." The remark made no sense to me at all, and I still don't understand it, but Selena did. She stood up. "You shouldn't have said that." There was no anger, no sharpness in her tone, only weariness and what sounded to me at the time like despair. Jerry was staring at her. The look on his face was so thinly sharp, so direct, so full of horror, that I was instantly aware that this conversation, which was meaningless to me, possessed some sort of positive and dreadful implication for him. "So," he said, "so that's it. I've wondered for a long time." She looked at him calmly. "I tried to stop you." "Yes," he said, "you tried to stop me. That was kind of you." He threw his head back and laughed. A short, nervous laugh that had the timbre of fear in it. "That was condescending of you, Selena." "No," she said in a very low voice. "No, Jerry, it wasn't condescension." He was watching her, I noticed. His eyes never moved from her face. I saw, too, that he was trembling, that his hands at his sides were twitching, and that his lips, which had suddenly become thin and gray, were quivering slightly. He licked them. "I would have found out sometime," he said to her at last. She made no reply. "But sometime is now." "Yes," she said, and her voice was impersonal. Suddenly he was in complete command of himself. "Do you know what I am thinking?" "Of course," she said. "Am I right?" She nodded her head gravely. "You know that, too." "All right," he said, as though agreeing to something, and turned to me. "Bach, you don't know what this is all about, do you?" "No," I told him. "That's good," he said, and there was affection in his voice. "I want you to do me a favor." "Sure," I told him. He left the fire. "I want you to take something to Dad from me when you go. I'll write it out now, before I forget it." He went into the study, and I followed him somewhat uncertainly. The whole thing was confusing, and for some obscure reason I felt frightened. Selena followed me, but she stopped in the doorway. Jerry was sitting at the desk in there. The last gray light from the east came through the window behind him and lighted the room with a dull, unlovely color. He was writing by the time I reached the room, with a swift, racing drive of his pen as though to finish before the light faded entirely. I watched him a minute, conscious of Selena white and glimmering in the dusk of the door behind me. All at once, with a quick, impatient gesture, he crumpled the note and flung it into a corner. "Hell," he said, with a swift, tight grin at me. "It's not so important after all." The rest happened before I knew it. The gun must have been there in the desk drawer, ready to his hand. He simply put it up to his head and pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot in that small room made my eardrums ring. The revolver clattered to the floor beside his chair. His arms went out across the desktop, and his head sank forward between them. It seemed to me that for an instant after the shot his eyes were looking at me. Then I couldn't see them anymore. For a long time, an unmeasured sequence of nothingness, I stood there in the room and stared at him. There is no way to explain how I felt, for I don't suppose I felt at all. My only sensation was one of having ceased to live, and a horrible tightness in my throat. I was aware that Selena was moving past me. She walked to the desk slowly but without uncertainty, and her face was perfectly quiet, the face of an angel who knows neither sorrow nor loss nor death nor anything else that quickens the pulse of living men and women. She placed her hands, palm down, on the surface of the wood, and leaned forward a little, looking down at him silently. Then she put her hand, her long hand with the strong white fingers, on his hair, so lightly that she scarcely touched his head. The next instant she was across the room and stooping to pick up the crumpled note in the corner. I watched her take it up and go out of the room. A moment later I heard the front door open and close again. Of course, I did all the things that you think of to do. He was dead, but I felt his heart to make sure. He was still warm inside his shirt. Some cheaply melodramatic instinct made me wrap up the gun in my handkerchief. Afterwards, I was glad I'd done so. I saved a lot of trouble with the sheriff. I carried his body into my own room and laid it out on my bed. I could not imagine taking it into the room he had shared with Selena. Closing his eyes was the hardest part. Then I went into the living room and built a very big fire and lit all the lamps. The whiskey bottle was in the kitchen. I found it easily enough, but I did not drink much. It seemed to stick in my throat. There was nothing else to do till morning. That long and twisted road into Los Palos would be indecipherable in the dark. As I sat there, I began to wonder if Selena was coming back. I kept listening for the sound of her step outside the door, but there was silence except for the strong rush of the wind past the house and the steady crackle of my fire on the hearth. Nothing that I thought or felt through that long night is of the least consequence. In reality, I was simply waiting, in a chaos of loneliness and sorrow and fear, for one of two things: Selena's return or the first light of morning. After a long time, the eastern window began to show gray. I went at once to start the car. In the dusk outside, the great loom of the mesa over my head made me shudder in spite of myself. I looked up where I knew the line of steps to be, wondering if she was coming back to the house. But there was no one there. The car started easily enough, and I got it round to the front door, as close as I could. When I went inside again, I left the engine running. I liked the sound it made. Getting him into the tonneau was horrible enough, but I was past the ability to feel any more. Before I left, I put out the lamps and the fire, and left the door open in case she came back. Then I blew the horn over and over again. Its harsh, deep yell went echoing up and down the valley, and came back flatly from the face of the mesa behind and above me. She did not come. I put the car in gear and rolled slowly down the road toward the desert and Los Palos, 70 miles away. The rest of it isn't important, though it was tedious enough, and long before the formalities with the sheriff and the undertaker were over, the numbness that had got me as far as Los Palos without agony had worn off. I don't know why they all took my story so readily at its face value, but, of course, there was the gun and the powder burn on his forehead. The sheriff went back with some of his men to try to find Selena, but she wasn't there, and he told me the house was just as I had left it. He managed to make me admit that Jerry hadn't been entirely happy with his wife, and that seemed to satisfy him and the coroner's jury. They let me go quickly, and it was just 3 days until I caught the morning train out of Los Palos. The only stop I made was at my apartment. I wanted to put Jerry's ashes in the silver urn. Chapter 15. Early Light. When I had finished speaking, I felt tired and empty of all emotion. For better or worse, the story was told. As I looked back over it, I wondered whether there was in it anything more than the record of personal obsession, springing out of the shock of finding LeNormand and a subconscious jealousy of Jerry that an analyst might put an ugly name to. The episodes that seemed strange to me might appear natural or coincidental to a calm, clear mind like Dr. Lister's. Nowhere in the course of my narration had I produced any tangible proof of my instinctive belief that Selena was different from all the rest of us, and that in some way not clear to me she was responsible for the deaths of 2 men. And yet, sitting there tired and miserable, I had a swift feeling that something was yet to be said or done. It seemed to me that there was an imminence in the air. Yes, imminence. It seemed to me that there was an imminence in the air, and that we were not at the end of the story. I could not guess what the end would be, but I dreaded it. Dr. Lister did not speak for a long time. His hands were clasped in front of him on the table, and he was staring at them as if the shape of his own knuckles was strange to him. Neither of us moved. Above and around us the night was undergoing a change. The great constellation of Orion was low on the western sky, and the darkness was turning to a tarnished, misty silver. Again, as on Cloud Mesa, I thought of the eastward spin of the earth rolling through space. The minute area of its surface which the 2 of us occupied was being turned toward the sun. The house, the trees, the wide reaches of the sound, the whole eastern edge of the continent, borne along inexorably into the light of a new day. Miles away, a train whistled once, a thin, lingering insertion of sound in the silence around us. He unclasped his hands at last and looked at me thoughtfully. "That is all you have to tell me?" "Yes." He put his palms down flat on the table, stood up, and blew out the stump of the candle.
"It does not seem to prove anything," he said, and sat down again. "Do you believe there is some connection between all the things you have told me?"
I studied for a minute, trying to find a way to give him the feeling that I had. "Yes, I'm sure there is. I know there is something behind the whole business because I know that Jerry found out what it is. That's why he shot himself."
"And you don't know what this thing is?"
"No," I said slowly. "I don't. Except that it is connected with Selena. Everything goes back to her." He nodded.
"She is a strange person, I grant you that. But except for her character, which I don't wholly understand, I'll admit, I can't see anything definite to give you this impression you seem to have."
"What about LeNormand's death? No one's been able to explain that, but it happened. And what about Golly Golly and the cards? That seems to me something more than just chance or coincidence. How about the things that happened on that trip to Montauk, and the fire she lighted out at Cloud Mesa? How did she light that?"
That's probably the easiest one.
Even as I asked the questions, I could imagine the answers he would make. LeNormand's death was an unsolved mystery. The police had never been able to find the murderer, but they don't find every murderer anyway. Golly Golly and his cards was a trick, in a nightclub where I was none too sober and probably easy to fool. Most mind-reading of the sort I'd accused Selena of on the Montauk Road was a matter of close observation of the small gestures and expressions of the other person, and Selena was a highly intelligent woman. She had pulled on the brake because of some scrap of sound or a flash of sun reflected from the approaching car had warned her. And as for the fire at Cloud Mesa, she had simply found a match. There was no part of my story which did not have a rational explanation.
All of those things, he said quietly, are out of the ordinary, but I don't see any mystery in them. I can think of an explanation for every single one. Except LeNormand's death, of course.
And Jerry's, I said brutally.
Yes, he replied in a low voice. That is the hardest of all for me to accept.
Please, Dad, I said, before you make up your mind that I'm suffering from some sort of delusion, try thinking about what's happened from the other point of view. If you can show me that there's nothing in it, you'll be doing me a profound service.
All right, he agreed, and lit a cigarette.
He looked across at me with sympathetic toleration.
Let's skip the minor things for the moment. Begin with Jerry and LeNormand.
There are some common factors there, I said.
Yes. What are they?
The most important of all, I said, is that there's no explanation in either case. The presence of Selena, and Jerry, and me too, I suppose, in the immediate vicinity both times.
Anything else?
One more thing, I told him. The equations. LeNormand's equations. They were part of the setting.
All right,
he conceded. And there was a fire, both times. He nodded. You can eliminate some of those factors. Jerry had nothing to do with either fire, and I didn't. That leaves Selena. Selena and the equations. Jerry was working on them out at Cloud Mesa. Don't forget that. He leaned forward.
Go on.
The pieces were slowly fitting themselves together in my mind, but nothing was wholly clear yet, and the picture which was forming was not translatable into ordinary words. The only other thing I'm sure of, I said lamely, is that when Jerry realized Selena had managed to light that fire, he thought at once of something else. But I'm not entirely sure what it was, and I can't put it into words.
Well, he observed after an uncomfortable pause, most of what you've said tonight has been about Selena. That's true, isn't it?
Yes.
And that means or suggests that if you are right, the answer must lie in her.
I know it does. There was no shadow of doubt in my mind on that point. It's got to. If we knew who she is and where she came from... I could not complete the sentence.
Luella Jamison?
What do you think? He shook his head.
I don't see how she could be. Even if the idiocy were the result of some mechanical factor and not congenital, it could not have cleared up so fast.
Then he looked out over the sound and said in a low voice,
Though I see what you've had to live with, it's no wonder...
He stopped suddenly. It's no wonder I have a fixation about her, you were going to say, if I have one. I'm still not sure. Tell me honestly what you think of Selena. You could look at her without thinking the things that have been tormenting me. When he finally spoke, he chose his words slowly and carefully.
Selena is the most intelligent and the most beautiful woman I've ever met.
He paused again and went on in an altered voice.
I was not entirely happy about Jerry's marrying her. She seemed hard to me, not merely on the surface, but all the way through. I kept watching her, hoping to see her tender or openly in love with Jerry, and I never did. She was cold and reasonable. Impersonal is perhaps the word, and I never knew whether she was different to Jerry. I worried about it. I didn't believe till tonight that she had another side at all."
I was puzzled. What, I wondered, had I told him to make him revise his estimate of Selena? "I still think all that about her," I told him. "She frightens me. She's all mind and no heart. She simply stood there knowing what he was going to do, while Jerry—"
"Yes," he admitted, "I know everything you can say, but there are two little things. You said she touched his hair after—
"Hell," I said, "she's seen movies and plays. She learned that gesture somewhere, the same way she imitated Grace, and it wasn't much."
"No, not much. But the other thing she couldn't have learned. You told me that the first evening you were out there she was reading one of Jerry's old books. Do you remember saying that? One of his old books of fairy stories."
He had put his finger on the one thing that seemed really out of keeping with the rest of her. Her other actions and moods, if you could call them that, seemed to me wholly consistent with some rigorous private standard of her own, a standard that came from the mind, but I could not understand why she should be reading Hans Christian Andersen. And as she read, she had been crying silently to herself. Why? It was incredible. "Yes," I admitted, "that was strange. I can't explain that."
"I think I can," he said, and his voice was gentle. His tone was gentle, sorry. "I am glad you told me about it. To me it proves that she was fond of him."
My look must have informed him that I didn't understand what he meant, for he smiled and went on in the voice he reserved for his rare personal confidences.
"You've never been married, so you may not understand, but to some women, Jerry's mother was one of them, the thought of their husbands as children, as small boys, is extremely touching. I suppose it's very likely it's the maternal part of their sex instinct dominating all the rest for the time being. That's why Selena was crying when she read Jerry's book, one that belonged to him when he was a boy."
Of course, it was possible. Neither Grace nor any other woman has ever yearned over me as a child or as a husband, so I didn't know. But my immediate feeling was that Dr. Lister was wrong. If Selena was moved to tenderness and even tears by something, I felt sure it was not because she was thinking of Jerry as a boy. There had been an intensity and a bitterness in her face then, as I remembered it, which did not fit in with such a theory. It was hard to believe, indeed, that anything Selena read would stir her deeply, especially a fairy story. She was not the sort of little girl, I was willing to bet, who cared much for fairy stories, and to suppose that now, when she was so appallingly mature and with a mind like hers, she should deliberately invite tears. Oh, let me retry that. I think I mangled all that. It was hard to believe, indeed, that anything Selena read would stir her deeply, especially a fairy story. She was not the sort of little girl, I was willing to bet, who cared much for fairy stories, and to suppose that now, when she was so appallingly mature and with a mind like hers, she should deliberately invite tears. No, it didn't fit. She read anything and everything that came under her hand, but none of it affected her. And if this story had moved her, it had done so by sheer chance. Anyway, what I'd seen on the page to which the book was open hadn't seemed sad. What was it? Something about lanterns being lighted and sailors dancing. I couldn't quite bring it back into my conscious memory. I was trying to remember what story she was reading, I told him finally, to explain my silence. I only looked at the few words I told you about, sailors lighting lanterns on a boat or something. He nodded.
"Yes, that was a favorite of Jerry's when he was 8 or so. I used to read it aloud to him while he ate his supper. It's the one called The Little Mermaid."
I didn't remember it. "Oh," I said vaguely. "Well, I don't suppose it matters."
"The Little Mermaid," he went on, "is the saddest and the best of all Andersen's stories. You must have read it. Don't you remember the little mermaid princess who lived at the bottom of the sea? One day she came up to the top of the water and saw a ship with a prince in it. She saved him from drowning and brought him to land. And she fell in love with him.
It came back to me with a rush. Yes, I said with a sense of inner excitement that I did not stop to analyze. That's it. And didn't she go to some witch to be made into a human being?
The witch transformed her fish's tail into legs and feet, but whenever she walked, she felt as if she were treading on sharp knives. She gave her tongue to the witch so she could not speak, and she agreed that if she didn't win the prince's love, she had to die without an immortal human soul. He looked away. Jerry always used to cry about that part of it.
The rest of the story was flashing through my mind as he spoke. How the little mermaid, after devoting herself to the prince, found that he was going to marry someone else, and how, on his wedding night, she slipped over the rail of the ship on which the wedding party was sailing, and dissolved into the sea foam. I remembered it all now, and the hot feeling of tears in my eyes when I had first read it. Perhaps it had moved even Selena. Perhaps. But in the instant when the memory of the story completed itself in my mind, another explanation for Selena's reaction to it occurred to me. She might have cried because the story was moving and beautiful, or because it was true. It was a fantastic, horrible notion, and I wanted immediately to stop thinking it. I remembered Jerry's face as he looked at Selena there on the settle before the fire she had somehow managed to light. Certainly there had been horror and incredulity in his eyes. It was possible that he had been thinking, then, the same thought that was beginning to crystallize in my own mind. I felt an intense acceleration of every image, feeling, operation of my consciousness. My thoughts were not under my control. They flickered back over the whole of the story I had just told. And nowhere did they find positive proof that the thing which was growing, expanding into unwelcome life in my brain, was impossible. The panic fear that swept over me as I realized that I might have discovered the answer was indescribable. I felt no sense of triumph at having found out the secret of Selena and her life with Jerry and the rest of us. Instead, I was sinking into icy black water, being suffocated by its pressure, drowning in Arctic night and winter. Layer after layer of cold and blackness was piling up above me, and the fright of death itself was pounding in my pulse. Fear like that, real fear, is an invasion. A physical thing full of ice and death that enters into every fiber of the body and possesses the mind. The worst of it was that there was no tangible thing with which I could deal. There was nothing to run away from and nothing to confront. This terror sprung from a nebulous idea, a half-perceived theory. My face must have given Dr. Lister a suggestion of what was in my mind. He was staring at me with alarm.
"What's the matter, Bach? What happened to you? What's happened to you?"
His voice came from a distance. I tried to answer, but my lips were stiff. I licked them. Something just occurred to me, something that might explain her, or part of her.
"What is it?"
I wanted to tell him, but I knew that he would think I was out of my mind. There was no way of expressing it that would not sound incredible. "I can't put it into words yet," I said, "but it's about Selena. I don't think she's, well, normal." Incomprehension was stamped on his face.
"I don't see what you mean. Do you think she's insane?"
"No," I said, "not insane. There's nothing wrong with her mind at all."
"What is abnormal about her, then?"
"Herself," I told him, separating the two words deliberately. "There's something entirely different about her. She isn't like most people. She has a better mind and a better body, but the quality I mean hasn't anything to do with comparatives."
"You think she's unique in some way? Nobody else in the world is like her?"
"Well," I answered, "I don't know about that. Maybe there are others of her kind. If there are, they're cleverer. They don't show it." The thought that I might be right about that made me pause. Even the possibility of encountering again someone like Selena, of living in a world where another like her existed, was appalling to me. I went on quickly. Anyway, I hope she's the only one. Can't you see how utterly different Selena is from you and me and Grace and everyone else we know? It's a difference that's much worse than if she'd just lost an arm or a leg or had her face smashed in an accident. Those things are just on the outside. This is something that goes clear through her. He shook his head.
I haven't the remotest notion what you are trying to say.
Well, I replied, I'll have to phrase it differently. Don't you feel that there's a lack in her? Don't you see that she's incomplete somehow?
No, I don't believe I do.
You said yourself that she was cold. I'd put it another way. She hasn't any soul. He made an impatient gesture with his hand.
This isn't getting us anywhere. Let's stick to facts.
Facts! My voice sounded harsh in my ears. There are all kinds of facts. Do you admit that it's a fact that Selena is different from every other person you've ever known?
Yes, I'll admit that.
And what sort of difference is it?
No two human personalities are ever identical.
You're evading the question.
No, he said, I'm not evading anything. Selena is not like you or me or anyone else. But the same could be said for you or for me or for anybody.
Good God, I said in desperation. Can't you see that she is more different than anyone you've ever known? Can't you understand that the reason for it isn't the normal variation between one person and the next? She's never been a part of the rest of us. She's been a visitor in everything and every place I've ever observed her.
A visitor?
Yes, I said, shivering with a cold that did not come from the air around us. She's never been anything else.
He looked thoughtful. That is a good description of her attitude. I never thought of it in just that way. There is something alien about her, perhaps.
And another thing, her mind. You admit that she's intelligent. She's more than that. She's so intelligent that she's either a genius or else... I did not dare complete the sentence. He caught me up on it at once.
Or else what, Bark?
Or else, I went on, with every word sticking in my throat, she isn't human at all. He stared at me. Her mind, I mean, not her body.
I don't know that I understand you.
I don't understand it myself. I don't know what it means either. But I think that Selena's intelligence isn't human. It isn't akin to anything in the rest of us. Her mind wasn't part of a baby and then of a child and then of a girl. It didn't grow up and go through the experiences that are common to every human life. It wasn't given to her by heredity the way yours and mine were given to us, with traits of our parents and maybe our ancestors blended into it. And I don't believe it was shaped by environment either. According to your own science, Dad, every living minute of every person is recorded on their brains. Each thing that ever happened to you or to me is part of us, written into some page of our minds. I don't believe the writing on the pages of Selena's mind is in any language you or I know, at least not till recently. The first entry we could read, I think, would be dated August 7th, 2 years ago.
That was when Luella Jamison disappeared in Collegeville?
Yes. He was looking at me as if he couldn't believe that he had understood me at all.
Then your idea is that Selena's mind suddenly began to function on that day?
No, I told him. My idea is that her mind appeared on that date. His voice was incredulous.
Appeared? Appeared from where?
The question was one that I had known he would ask. If I knew the answer, and I was afraid to think whether I did or not, I did not want to speak it. There would be finality about uttering it, and I did not want anything final. I don't know from where. From some other place. That's as near as I can come to it.
You can't believe that. There's no conceivable... Unless you think she's possessed?
I nodded. Yes, something like that.
Impossible. I'm not even sure there is such a thing as possession. Split personality, perhaps. But Selena isn't a split personality.
There was no argument about that, of course. No, I assented. She's all of a piece throughout.
Well, then, he said, and I could see that he was impatient, I don't see how you can say...
I cut into his sentence. Her mind is all of a piece. It doesn't belong with her body. It's just living in it, if you like to put it that way.
This is a terrible idea, he said slowly,
and shook himself as if to get rid of it.
I don't believe you're right about it. It's not scientific.
I shrugged. What difference did it make whether every truth was a scientific truth?
What, he went on carefully, is your theory of the cause or purpose of this mind visitation in Selena?
I'm not sure. But there's the Hans Andersen story to go back to. The Little Mermaid wanted a soul. I think that's what Selena wants, too. He struck his hand down on the table.
Let's be sensible. I don't like these vague words. Exactly what do you mean by soul?
Everybody means the same thing by it, I retorted. Soul is the part of you that isn't your body and isn't your mind either. It's what ties you together inside. It's the essence of what you are. He shook his head.
Emotions, which appear to be about what you mean by soul, are effects of certain glandular imbalances arising from sensory stimuli.
Stop being a doctor, Dad. You know better than that.
Sorry.
He looked at me gently, excusing me because of my fatigue and what I had been through. No, I said sharply. I don't want you making allowances for me. Do you honestly believe that all the scientific rigmarole you just recited really means anything? Does it explain anything to you? What about art and religion and love? What about sorrow, Dad? Are all those things nothing but the product of some glandular imbalances, as you put it?
I don't know, he said,
and his voice was so low I could scarcely hear it. Yes, you do. They aren't. They can't be. Ask Selena. She'll tell you they can't. He answered quietly.
You're not very coherent. Perhaps if you explained this whole idea of yours in simple words, I'd be able to understand it.
I was ashamed of my outburst. I wasn't attacking you, Dad, but I know I'm right. Let's put it this way. Selena cried when she read the story of the Little Mermaid. She cried because she saw in it the elements of some experience of her own. She is an alien too, and so that story moved her deeply.
Naturally, he said thoughtfully, if you are right, it would do so. It would do so.
He was silent for some time, staring at the tabletop.
I cannot accept your assumption. It is too full of mystery. I have a scientific mind, perhaps. I can't believe that Selena is anything but an extraordinary woman, an adventuress, perhaps, and possibly a foreigner.
I had expected he would say that. I hope you're right, I answered. My theory is, well, I wish to God I'd never thought of it. But it does explain a lot of things that you can't.
Go ahead, he said. It will be better for you to get this off your chest.
It all begins, I said, on the evening when Luella Jamison was standing outside the restroom of the Sunoco station in Collegeville with her hands on the lattice. Think of her there, a body with no mind, no intelligence at all. Probably the brain cells were inside her skull all the time, but they weren't connected to anything. Within 3 or 4 minutes, Luella Jamison vanishes. It took intelligence to do that one thing and do it as fast and efficiently as Luella did it. 10 times more intelligence than Luella ever displayed before. You'll grant that.
Yes, he said reluctantly. I'll admit that, I suppose.
Luella's body suddenly acquired a mind. I don't know yet where it came from, though I have a guess. But anyway, it went straight to one certain place in all Collegeville, like steel to a magnet. It went straight to Walter LeNormand. He must have been in the observatory at the time, getting ready for his night's work. Luella Jamison walked in on him. What happened between them I don't know, but in 2 days he married her. And Luella Jamison, who did not know her own name, probably, became Selena LeNormand.
"You're theorizing," he interrupted. "How do you know she went to LeNormand?"
Because there is no other place she could have gone, and no other likely place Selena could have come from. Because Selena has to have an intelligence near her powerful enough, like LeNormand's, to give her some point of contact with human existence. When we met her first, after his death, she was dull and stupid, almost in a trance, till she met Jerry. His mind was the same kind as hers. It made her come to life again. Jerry and LeNormand had the same sort of intelligence. They were mathematicians. For that matter, I added, there were mathematicians in Luella's own ancestry, if you'll recall.
Yes, Parsons said that.
All the time I was talking to him, the certainty that I was right kept growing and expanding inside me. With every word I spoke, the truth came to life in my brain like a winter-torpid snake in the spring sun. I no longer fought against the fear of it because there was no room left in which to fight. Revulsion and terror were in every corner inch of my consciousness. My face must have reflected some of it, for Dr. Lister watched me with concern and a professional suspicion. But I was indifferent to that. All I wanted was to complete the story, as if, by communicating it to him, I could siphon off some of the cold dread I was experiencing. When Luella Jamison walked into Eldridge Observatory, she went there because she knew that LeNormand was there. At least, she knew his intelligence was there. With the force that was in her mind, that was a part of her, it would be easy to get him to marry her. Hadn't she made me offer her a cigarette when I knew she never smoked? That was a small thing, but she could have done anything with me, and even with a man like LeNormand. So she lived with him, learning the ways of people, adapting herself to an unfamiliar life, just as the little mermaid lived among mortals when she first came up out of the sea.
"Surely you don't think Selena's mind came out of the ocean?"
he asked me when I reached this point in my exposition. "No," I said, "it wasn't the sea." So things had gone for several months. And then LeNormand, who must have been living by that time in a strange world of surmise and perhaps of fear, went back to his work, his great paper on space and time, and began to go over his equations. He must have made his final discovery the afternoon of the state football game. And when he made that last stop which put the whole thing clear before him, a demonstrated truth, he must have sat there thinking about it. Certainly then she knew what he was doing, even though she was not in the room with him. I remembered how she had read my mind so often in the past, in unobtrusive ways that I had overlooked because I did not see their implications. How much more easily she could have known what LeNormand had found, what intense and mathematical symbols were forming in his brain as he worked and thought. She sat there in his house and understood what he had found. To her it seemed so clear, so true, so irrefutable, that she decided he had to die. Dr. Lister cleared his throat.
Why should LeNormand have been a menace to her because he'd made some sort of mathematical discovery?
His tone suggested that the question ought to reveal my own folly to me. I can't tell you that. But remember what Jerry said about its importance? The biggest thing in the world, by God. All I can guess is that somehow LeNormand's discovery was connected with Selena.
Is mathematics, you mean?
Yes, I answered him slowly. His proof of what Jerry called the serial nature of time. It had something to do with her.
But what? He said impatiently. Do you think she was jealous of it, or what?
No, I think LeNormand believed he'd found a way to test his theory.
The only way he could do that would be to travel through time, physically or at least mentally.
Yes, I admitted.
But that's absurd.
Selena didn't think so. She killed him to keep him from trying it.
This is all mad, he asserted. Why should she care?
I looked at him and tried to make him feel the conviction that was in me, because she didn't want him to find out where she came from.
So,
he said, and his tone was pure amazement,
you think she, or her mind, came through time?
Yes.
From the past or the future?
I don't know. Maybe there isn't any difference. Dr. Lister looked at me with pity openly in his eyes.
This is all delusion, Bach. Your mind is playing tricks on you. There's no sense to this notion of yours and no evidence for it.
Yes, there is, I told him. There's one piece of evidence. That is what she said. That is what she said to Jerry in Bermuda, lying beside him in the moonlight. She said, "This is what my people do not know." You see, she was beginning to find out what she had missed with LeNormand. Her mind was learning from her body. It takes mind and body both to make a soul. Living with Jerry taught her something of what it means to be a human being.
Then why should she have let him kill himself?
You must see that now. Jerry never stopped wondering about LeNormand's death. His love for Selena made him all the more anxious to find the solution to it. He believed that those equations were the important clue. He had tremendous mathematical ability, and he studied them until he understood what they meant. After that, when he saw the fire that Selena had lighted, he thought of the fire that killed LeNormand. And then he knew why LeNormand died, and how.
Selena was responsible for both the fires, then?
Yes.
How did she create them?
I was very tired, and I could see that he did not believe me. I had not convinced him. The dark thought that obsessed me, the fear that was almost overwhelming me, had no existence for him. There was no use going on. It doesn't matter how she created them. I don't know. You're just asking the question to humor me. I haven't convinced you. He spread his hands in a gesture of apology.
You're tired to the point of collapse, Bach. People's brains get queer kinks in them when they're as exhausted as you are.
He was quiet for a while.
In a way, I wish I could believe you. Any explanation would be better than none at all.
Not this explanation, I told him. I've never been so afraid in my life as I am this minute. He tried to smile.
You'll feel differently after a good sleep. I'll give you something that will relax you.
I hope so, I replied. I hope you have the chance to do that.
Of course I will.
Yes, I said. You will if I'm wrong, but not if I'm right.
Why not?
Think back, I told him. Remember what happened to the other two people that found out.
And if you're right, you think the same thing will happen to us?
I steadied my voice as much as I could. She will know that we have found out, and she will come here. After all, it's been almost a week since Jerry... She could have been here days ago. The very certainty in my voice alarmed me. She'll come all right. Whether she'll kill us or not, I can't tell you.
No, he said. You mustn't let thoughts like that get the upper hand. Selena is just a woman, a strange woman. This nightmare you've built up in your mind will pass in a few days. You've had a shock and you are tired. That's all there is to it. We'll go upstairs now and have some sleep.
All right, I said. I don't want to argue with you. I want you to be right. I'll take your sleeping powder, or whatever it is, and wake up sane again. But first, I'm going to sit here for 5 or 10 minutes. That'll be time enough to demonstrate to me that she isn't coming. It was quick the 2 times before. We sat waiting. The dawn was absolutely still around us. Nothing moved. Dr. Lister looked at my face quietly with his hands folded. I think he was planning the details of his treatment to restore me to myself. I hoped that the first thing he would do would be to exorcise the cold, irrepressible fear that went through me in steady, pulsing waves with every beat of my heart. The pause seemed never-ending. Give me one sec here. I'm getting a love note. My apologies. Important phone call. Where were we? I think we were at the top of the page. Dr. Lister looked at my face quietly with his hands folded. I think he was planning the details of his treatment to restore me to myself. I hoped that the first thing he would do would be to exorcise the cold, irrepressible fear that went through me in steady, pulsing waves with every beat of my heart. The pause seemed never-ending. Gradually, I saw resolution begin to shape his mouth. He was on the point of saying something. At that very instant, there was a stir at my feet. It was Boojum. I just read that. It was Boojum. He walked out from under the table, stiffly, and turned to look down the terrace toward the corner of the house behind Dr. Lister. He did not growl, nor wag his tail. He simply looked. After a few seconds, his ears went up stiffly into 2 triangles. Both of us were watching him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something like hesitation come into Dr. Lister's face. There was a sound of footsteps beyond the corner of the building. The color went out of his face then, in one swift wash of gray that left him looking old and broken, but not afraid. The lines around his mouth tightened. He lifted his head and half-turned in his chair. She came toward us, walking with that same long, swinging stride. Even when I knew, as I did then, that she was not a person, not human, not of my own sort at all, there was something so magnificent about her that no fright or revulsion could cancel the effect of it. The fear inside me was swallowed up by a passive expectation. This was the inevitable end of the story, and whatever was to happen, it was out of my power to influence it in any fashion. She came to the table and stood beside it, with the tips of her fingers resting on its top, looking down quietly at both of us.
"So," she said after a while, "you found out."
Her eyes rested on me with no expression in them that I could read. "Yes." My voice sounded perfectly calm. She gave me a half smile.
"You are a strange person, Bark. I should never understand you. I suppose you hate me."
"I am afraid of you," I told her.
"There is no need for that," she said, and her voice was cool and impersonal. "Nothing will happen to you or to Dr. Lister. I do not intend to kill you. What little knowledge you have is of no danger to me. You cannot prove any of it, and the rest of the world will not pay any attention to your story if you tell it."
Her calm, complete assumption of superiority stung me, even in the lethargy of will that possessed my mind. "That isn't what I mean." She studied me thoughtfully.
"You are afraid of me for some other reason, then?"
"Yes," I said, "for what you are." It seemed to me that a look of pain came into her eyes.
"Oh, to you that makes a difference. And yet you do not know what you are yourself. You do not know what any other human being is. You know as much about me as about anyone. More, perhaps. We have seen each other often. Once I even saved your life. But you are afraid of me because I am not like you."
"Yes," I said again. "Go back where you came from." She moved her hand, almost irresolutely, across the top of the table.
"That is not so easy. Living here has changed me. Why should you hate me when you do not know, all of you, where you came from yourselves?"
"Leave us," I told her. "Even if you know the answers to all our questions, leave us. You don't belong here." Her voice was quiet.
"I have found that out. I shall go back."
Dr. Lister turned his chair and stared at her. "Before you go," he said, and his voice was hard and bitter, "I want to ask you something." She lifted her hand in assent. The expression on his face as he spoke was a mingling of loathing and incomprehension. "You seem to know what Bark has said about you. Is he right?" She met his look squarely, and in the way she stood and answered it in silence for a moment I could feel the power of her anger.
"Did you suppose," she said finally, "that you were alone in the enormous spaces of the universe? Do you believe that you are the ultimate product of creation? There is nothing unique about you."
Her tone was so level, so coldly insistent, that even Dr. Lister averted his head and seemed to shrink in upon itself.
"Is there any reason why I must leave you alone? You do not own me, and you have no power over me. Why," she said, and there was an edge of bitter amusement in her tone, "when the earth has traveled around the sun a few more times, you will be dead."
He lifted his head, and there was defiance on his face. "Yes," he said, "and you do not seem much concerned with death. You have lived here 2 years, and in that time you have brought about the deaths of 2 men. You talk as if that were nothing." She dropped her eyes.
"I know how important that seems to you. Believe me, I did not mean to kill either of them."
Dr. Lister said coldly, "I don't believe you."
"Walter LeNormand's death was sheer accident. I had no intention of killing him. I wanted nothing but to stop him from thinking, prevent him from going on with his work. I knew what he had discovered, what more he would find if he went on thinking. I was determined to stop him. There aren't any words to tell you what I did. There is a way of using the force of the mind, and I used it. I turned it on him. I willed him to stop thinking, to lose consciousness. My plan was to go, then, to the observatory and destroy his work. But I forgot one thing."
"What was that?" said Dr. Lister, as if he were humoring her.
The football game. Thousands of people sitting at it, excited, emotional, pouring out a force 1,000 times more powerful than a bolt of lightning. It was that force that killed him. It magnified, if you like, the force of the impulses I was sending until they were so powerful they consumed him.
I see.
There was nothing in his voice to give me a hint of what was in his mind, but when he spoke next there was a level deadliness in his voice, in his tone, that I had never heard in it before.
You also killed my son, he said.
She turned toward him so that I could no longer see her face. "Jerry," she said, as though the sound of his name hurt her intolerably. "Yes, Jerry had to die too, and because of me. But what else could have happened? He realized the truth. Do you think he could have lived with it?" There was no answer, and she turned to me. "Do you, Bark?" "No," I said. She turned back to Dr. Lister. "Bark's answer is the only one. I tried to stop him. I didn't want him to find out. But he did. And he was too intelligent for the rest of you. In time he would have found a way to make people listen to him. I could not let that happen." He dropped his eyes from her face and looked at the table.
"Damn you," he said.
"Before I go," she went on without paying any attention to his words, "I want to tell you one thing more. If I could stay, if there were anything here left to stay for, I should do so." She turned and looked full at me. "The little mermaid had to go too, because there was no longer any possibility of love." I saw that there were tears in her eyes. "Goodbye, Bark. I loved your friend." Turning to Dr. Lister, she half lifted her hand as if to touch him, in the same gesture I remembered from Cloud Mesa, and then withdrew it. "And I loved your son," she said. "Remember that." With a single quick motion, she stripped her finger of the 2 rings, the one with the great square emerald in it, and the narrow band of gold with which Jerry had married her, and put them on the table between us. They lay there, bright and beautiful, on the painted iron, and we looked at them. I did not see her go, but the sound of her feet died along the terrace and around the corner of the home. I did not see her go, but the sound of her feet died along the terrace and around the corner of the house. When I picked up the emerald ring, it was still warm from her finger.
"Whoever she is," said Dr. Lister after a long time, "she knows how to make an exit."
He said nothing more for a full minute.
"There is no proof. It is all fantastic. She talked like a mad woman, and yet the only real fact is that Jerry is dead."
He stood up, and we went into the house together. There are 2 things to add to this story. When the place at Cloud Mesa was closed and its contents shipped east to us, I went through Jerry's papers with care. The notebooks for his thesis alone were missing. What became of them I have never found out, but the inference is obvious. Luella Jamison has been found. I heard about that from Parsons. It appears that her father, getting up early one morning to go to town, found her standing at the front gate. She was holding on to the pickets of the fence beside it. He led her into the house, and she slipped at once into the routine by which she had always lived. According to Parsons, the Jamisons are happy because she is home again. And that was To Walk the Night by William Sloane.
Man, oh man, what a climax.
Jerry killing himself is very abrupt. I definitely felt it that way. I felt that way the first time. I felt it even more this go round. You know it's coming, but you don't think it's going to happen like that. Basically caught me by surprise here too. So yeah, that is To Walk the Night. One thing that definitely got to me this time around is how Selena is like, okay, there is this sense that, oh, you know, the misogyny of the era and, you know, women have to be a certain way, but there is also this clear sense, or this sense to me anyway, that she is truly in a way sympathetic, even though she has in fact murdered two people, or in effect murdered two people, to keep them from finding out about whatever it is that she is. And it's not super duper clear what that is. Some consciousness from out of time. Possibly she had to kill them to prevent the observer effect from otherwise affecting her. I don't know. You could come up with a bunch of different interesting ideas with the concept. But you do get the sense that she did care. She did, either due to being in a human body long enough or whatever, she certainly cared about Jerry. So it's a pretty good one. It is dated in a number of ways, but I think basically the whole core of it really still functions quite well and has a certain timeless quality. It's pretty good. I like it. I think narratively, the second story in this The Rim of Morning collection, which is entitled The Edge of Running Water, I feel narratively that one is holds up a little better. So when we get to that, I think people will enjoy it. But I do really like, on second read through, I really like that one, to Walk the Night, quite a bit. That one has grown on me quite a bit. It just works. Good stuff. I do wish William Sloane had actually published more material, or written more material, because the man had talent. Quite a lot of it. Speaking of people who have substantial talent, this Friday will be reading through more of The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. If we can claw our way through the Stygian darkness of his prose that he decided to use for the tale, which we've done so far. Plunderlings, yes. What confused me is that she needs to be around mathematical minds to function properly, but at the end she seems fine. Maybe she is feeding off the dad? I think that's a reasonable assumption. It could also be that at some point she's gone past like a tipping point where she's inhabited the body enough that she doesn't need a mind to function as much. It's all kept just vague enough in general that you can kind of come to a number of different conclusions, and I think they can all kind of work on some level. So I'm not totally sure what's going on at the end. I think that guess is as good as any, because the dad clearly has a scientific brain. Perhaps they act as a stabilizing influence. Maybe she's just attracted to them, or maybe she's like some sort of a future observer or observer from some alternate timeline. I don't know. That doesn't really explain most of her actions. I don't think this is dealing with that kind of, because it's dealing with serial time that's happening multiple different times, as opposed to The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. One that I should probably read aloud here, to be honest. There's a bunch of older sci-fi that I think would be worth doing on here. It would also give me an opportunity, if I did some Wells, to do... so there's this guy, this author, what's his name? Let's see if I can catch the book out of the corner of my eye. I can't read the title. Or I can read the title. I can't read the author name. What is the author name? What's his name? Stephen Baxter. So there's this author named Stephen Baxter who's kind of taken it upon himself to do, like, unofficial sequels to a bunch of H.G. Wells's work. I know, or I have copies of ones he's done for a sequel to The Time Machine and a sequel to War of the Worlds. And they both hold up pretty well. They are kind of like, let's take the setting and setup of, the previous book and then continue it with some extrapolations or ideas that are like touched on but aren't really fleshed out, as well as like some new ideas. The sequel to The Time Machine is called The Time Ships, and it goes crazy. it goes to some pretty crazy places. That one is a romp. The unofficial sequel to War of the Worlds, which is entitled The Massacre of Mankind, is rather more grounded, but also, and substantially more horrifying than the original. Or I feel is probably as horrifying to contemplate as the original would have been then, and it feels like it's a bit less rompy and a bit more about this is how grim we can make this entire concept, while also kind of expanding on some ideas that are sort of around and adjacent to that. Not quite in the same way that, they're not like, I don't know if anyone here has read League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore, any of those, where those are kind of taking place in a mythos where like every single Victorian era story is all true and all happening, or has all happened, and taking place like right around that time. So you have, in the first one, if I can remember which the first one has. In the first one, I believe you've got the Cavorite from The Time Machine as being kind of a MacGuffin, not for actual time travel purposes, I don't think. You've got Jekyll and Hyde, you've got the Invisible Man, you've got Dracula, you've got all this stuff that's all kind of... You've got Captain Nemo from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. So it's like, oh, let's take all this Victorian-era mythology stuff, as well as like the ultimate piece of mythology himself, Alan Quatermain, as like the ultimate representation of Victorian-era British manliness and empire, which is like he's a joke. He's like an in-joke satire that you don't really understand until you've absorbed a bunch of the stuff that he represents. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is low-key very brilliant, but it is also so densely packed with in-jokes and nods that if you haven't read like half of the stuff that it is referencing, it just whoosh, goes right over your head. I know it did for me. Like the second volume of it deals with both War of the Worlds and Edgar Rice Burroughs' Princess of Mars. There's like that mythology put in there. It goes truly insane. There's bonkers stuff to be had there. But these by Stephen Baxter are not like that. They're like, this book happens in a vacuum, and this is a sequel to it. Is what those are. That you could maybe take further extrapolations from them is one thing, but you don't have to. So I'd like to get around to reading those at some point, but I'm not going to promise them anytime soon. So next week, I'm not going to be here Wednesday. Wednesday is out. Friday looks like it'll still be happening, though. I might be wrong, but I won't know until wicked late. as I didn't know until basically today that I was going to have today free. There are pros and cons to this. The pro is we got through To Walk the Night by William Sloane. The con is the uncertainty of not knowing. That is the con. So next week, yeah, since Wednesday's almost definitely off the table, as far as I know. Next week we won't have a Wednesday stream. The week after we will start. Yeah, I think I'll go through and start the other William Sloane tale that we have here. The Edge of Running Water, in this 2-story collection, The Rim of Morning. After I do that, I might read the introduction by Stephen King, but I'm not going to do it before, because it does have some spoilers floating around. But it's not... I also have some other side commentary on The Edge of Running Water. Some historical perspective, so to speak. Some interesting tie-ins. Let's see. The Fridays should be free, so we'll keep chipping away at the Nightland. Next Monday, since it looks like I'm going to have that free, next Monday we will start... Yeah, why not? We'll start Volume 1 of Legend of the Galactic Heroes. Strictly speaking, not giant robots. Not terribly thematically appropriate for Mecha Mondays, but I've done that before, so it's not that big a deal. I'd put this as mecha adjacent, in that it comes from this vast bevy of Japanese science fiction. In this case, it's Japanese science fiction that is also kind of War of the Roses. Actually, that's not really appropriate. It's a later, maybe the 100 Years' War. Maybe the 100 Years' War. One of those medieval conflicts. I can't remember which one it's more directly applicable to. It's different than both, but it's in space, so it's cool. It is a space opera in the truest sense. It is broad, it is dramatic, it is massive in scope. It is also an imaginary historical text, so it's kind of dry. Some of that is due to the translation, but my understanding is the source material is also fairly dry. Pre-translation, in the native Japanese, it is also fairly dry. After that, for Mondays, at that point, hopefully I'll have gotten off my duff and finished reading all of the Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam novelization, so I can read that out. Otherwise, I've gotten through like half of it, so I can get started, and that'll provide the goad required to bump me along through the rest. That's not due to me disliking the novelization. It's the fan translation is really well done, very easy reading. Honestly, it flows a little better than the first Gundam novelization that we did way back at the beginning of this year, which I still highly recommend. It's good stuff. I enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed myself doing that. The Zeta Gundam one is, does not depart as drastically from the original animated series. It does, however, provide a lot of interesting background information that isn't readily apparent in the series, which I have appreciated just in the bit that I've read, which is only, again, like half of it. It's, 5 volumes long? They're short, though. They're like 5 volumes of like 150 pages, maybe. So pretty much on a par with what we've done for, what's it called? My brain don't work good. Full Metal Panic. There we go. Okay, here we are. Literature. Gub-dub. No, that's not it. Where is it? Where have you gone? There you are. 5 volumes, yes. How long are they? good question. Yeah, like 150 pages a pop, but they read faster than that. So it'll probably be maybe like, I don't know, 2 installments per, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 at most. I want to say the translator has some relevant notes in there, but I can't remember now. Is what it is. Nothing that matters for the moment. It's going to be a while since we get... it will be a while before we get there. After we finish with The Edge of Running Water, we will then move on, I think, directly to Cytine by C.J. Cherry. That won't be for another month or so, but it should be around the end of the year. Probably a little before, maybe. It'll be around the beginning of the new year. And once we finish with The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson, in lieu of reading more William Hope Hodgson, which I could very well do because I have gotten a 5-book collection of his works, which I have not read all of yet, sadly, to my chagrin. I will get around to doing that, though. I have read what is it, this volume, I think it's the 4th volume, The Nightland and Other Perilous Romances, Volume 4. I've read through all of that one, and I have read through most of the stories, I think, in the first one. I forget what that one's entitled. House at the Edge of the Borderland and something, 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 I think is the subtitle. I don't remember now. So we will get through we will get through The Nightland, and we'll call it good for that. But I have plenty more of his work that I can read in a pinch if I need to. After we get through that, we will start on Endymion by Dan Simmons, the sequel to Hyperion. It is a rather different tale, but certain aspects will seem familiar. Structurally, I feel it is a bit different. It is a different animal altogether. Part of my, if I can call it beef with Endymion, is that it's good. It's very good. It does some really good things. I have some issues with the ending. We won't go into that until we get there. Mostly, I think the majority of my problem with it is that Hyperion and the Fall of Hyperion are an incredibly, incredibly tough act to follow. Like, by any measure. And Endymion does stand on its own pretty well, but there are big chunks of the book, or significant parts of the book, I should say. Not that you're wondering where is this all going, but where you will be told as the reader, oh, basically everything you knew from the previous book is somehow wrong, or is recontextualized in a way that makes it so that the things you thought you knew you didn't actually know. And these are explained away in reasonable ways. This is not spoilers. I have mixed feelings about that. All I'm doing is saying, meter your expectations. That's not the term. That's not the phrase. What's the phrase? Keep your expectations metered. It is still good. There are some phenomenal sequences. Like, some sequences that are better than some of the best sequences of Hyperion, I would argue. The highs are very high in Endymion. But Hyperion is completely bonkers. And Endymion is also bonkers, but in very different ways. We'll get there, but we should have that started, I think. We'll definitely have that started before the end of the year. I have warned that I'm probably going to have some major structural changes to the overall, some major overhauls to the structural setup of the streams. Namely, we'll be changing the days of the week. I will know more about what that's going to look like when we actually get there. tentatively, it's going to transfer to Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I think is what's going to wind up working out best. But that's not going to be for months. Probably that's not going to be for months. We'll find out. I may or may not go to doing one book at a time. So 3 days a week it'll be the same book. And just plow through them that way and just kind of rotate between some. That probably won't be until we're done with Endymion and Cytine / Regenesis, maybe. I am going to read Regenesis on stream, but figuring out how the timing on all this is going to work is kind of a whole thing. So when we get there, we'll get there. Until then, stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. See you all later. Toodaloo!